Hi, and welcome to this tutorial, how can I display a multi-page PDF on a screen in Unreal Engine 5? Now, this is building off my previous tutorial on building a podcast set. Now, let's suppose that in this podcast, you wanted to have this TV in the background that was showing a series of slides that was relevant to the discussion between your two participants. So we could take a PDF, split it out into pages, and then have them display up here one at a time, and you could assign it to a button on your keyboard so that at runtime you could change to the next slide, so you keep it live, updated, in sync with the discussion. So at the end of this video, you will be able to use input actions, dynamic material instances, and an array to update a texture at runtime using blueprints. And I'm assuming you have basic Unreal knowledge with a general familiarity with the concepts of blueprints and materials. I will be showing you step by step, but if it is your first time looking at a material or looking at blueprints, it might be a little hard to follow. I've divided this into 3 sections. First, we'll prep the scene by assigning a camera in the level, creating a plane to place the television screen, and then build that into a blueprint and swap it out, and import our textures and create our input actions. Then the next section is the first part of the blueprint, and we will add a mapping context which informs Unreal to allow the input actions that we've created. And then we'll create the dynamic material instance and build an array which will house all the different pages that could possibly appear here. Then in the last section, we'll continue on with the blueprint and build the functions of the next and previous buttons, which are our input actions. So let's get to it. So first thing that I want to do is assign one of the cameras temporarily to be our perspective when we hit play, because at the moment we hit play and we are down here and I can't lift up. I'm pushing up, down, and left, right, and nothing's happening. All I can do is change the perspective. So what we want to do is we want to use the perspective of the wide shot, because this will let us see perfectly well what's going on the TV. So let me just jump out of this and let's open the level blueprint. Okay, we are now in the level blueprint, and we are going to want to set a view target with blend. So first, let's get the player controller and drag off of here and set view target with blend. Okay, great, and let's connect that to begin play. So when the game starts, it's going to set the view target, and the view target is our wide shot camera. Now we can't assign it directly in here, but we can promote this to a variable, and then if we compile, okay, this is just not showing easily here, so I've just put the details panel on the right so it's a little bit easier for you to see in the screen capture. And with our new view target here, we can choose our camera wide 2-shot. And so that's now telling the view target that this is the view that we want to have at runtime. So I hit compile, save, close this, and now when we hit play, we have the perspective of the wide shot that we created. Now you're going to want to remember that you've done that, so you can disable that functionality if it's gumming up your works when you're trying to output different camera perspectives, or if you're trying to work with a camera tracking system. But this is fantastic for us to be able to see what we're doing here. So now we want to get in here and create the screen. So depending on how the television is built, you might be able to replace just the texture directly, or we might have to create a plane in front. But I've selected the TV now. I'm hitting Control B to locate it in our content browser, and I can see from the texture that it's this box here. So this is a bit more complicated than I want to get into. I'd rather just have something that trims itself and places itself perfectly. So we're going to close that, and I'm going to add a plane to the world and drag it to to be a child of the television. Game ready free TV. Yeah, so let's drag that in. And I'm going to zero out the location so it snaps right to a relative place. Great. Lift this up and hit space bar to toggle the gizmo. And I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And now we need to try and find where it just sits in front of the TV. Great. Very good. Now we want to line up the right and left edges. The top and the bottom will eventually crop because the images that we'll be bringing in for our texture will have an alpha channel built into them, which will crop it out automatically. So let's grow the plane. It's too far. Okay, I've got to do this by hand now. Good, this is locked. 1.25, not big enough. 1.3. Keep going. 1.35. 1.38. All right, now let's take a look at these edges here, see how I've done. Good. Great, so it goes just to the edge, and then it gets trimmed off. Perfect. So we are now going to create a material and keep our things organized. So I believe in podcast set materials. Yeah. So we'll create a new material. Call this material TV screen. And let's come into here. And let's create a texture parameter 2D. Texture sample parameter 2D. Great. And we'll call this TV image. Drag the RGB into the base color. And click on the empty space so that we can get to the blend mode and make it masked. And then take the alpha, drag it into the opacity mask. When we have our PNG saved, it'll have an empty area, and that will trim off the top and the bottom so that we have just the perfect 16 by 9 box. So that's all we want to do here. So apply and save. And let's create a material instance so that we could use this on multiple TVs if we wanted. TV screen. And I'm going to drag it onto the plane. And that is exactly what we want it to be looking like right now. So if we jump over to Photoshop, I've created a image that is square, and the image size is 1024 by 1024. So for Unreal, it's best that you keep to a power of 2 and a square image. So that's 1024 by 1024 be 1K, or 2048 by 2048 for 2K, 4096 by 4096, for example. Now, this can create challenges to you that you think you need to squash and stretch your image to make it fit in here, which causes a lot of pain because you'll never get it right on the other side, or you'll be doing some painful math to work it out. And then you have to make a small adjustment. It gets really complicated. So let's leave it at this. I don't think I need 2048 by 2048 because I don't think you need that high resolution. I would go for the minimum that you think you're going to need. And then I've created a little bit of text here just to say page 1. Now you go up to File, Export, Quick Export as PNG, and choose where you want to save it. And so for the purposes of this demo, I've created page 1, then 2, and 3. And so if somebody sends you a PDF that you need to use, you can split it out page by page, just import the pages one by one into Photoshop, scale them down to fit perfectly in the width, make sure that there's nothing above and below, and save them out as PNGs, and they will display perfectly. In this case, I've created a background using the fixed ratio of 16 by 9, and I created the background here as a solid color, and I clicked and stretched out, and then I created a matte. So that's how I know that this is exactly 16 by 9, which is probably going to be pretty close to the TV, but maybe not fit it exactly. But I would just go with whatever the dimensions are of the PDF that you're working with. So with those saved out, let's go back to our podcast set into our textures here. Let's import those 3 PDFs. Of course, you could have 15 or 30 or however many of them, and save all. And when we open them up here, you can see it's respected the top and bottom boundary. So we know this has come in just perfectly. So those are good to go until we start building the blueprint. So let's look at some input actions now. So in the podcast set here, let's create a folder called input actions. Go inside and go to input, input action, IA, next button, and open this up. And we want to have a trigger when it is pressed. Trigger fires only once. Save and close. So this is a reference to the action that we want to do. We'll be accessing this later in the blueprints. We have a next button and we want to create another one for our previous button. So IA prev button, and save those. Then to let Unreal know that it should be able to access these, we need to create in inputs a input mapping context. So IMC TV buttons. And now in here are mappings. Going to add IA next button. And in the drop down, you could go through here and find the keys that you want to use, or you can click the little button here and then just press the button. So I'm going to use Y as the next button and make sure that the trigger is pressed. And they're going to add a mapping. And now we'll do IA previous button. And again, press this button. And since it's previous, I want it to be to the left of our next button. So hit T and save. So that's the basics that we want to set up. We've got everything ready to go. And in the next section, we'll dive right into the blueprint and start building away. Okay, now that we've got the initial setup done for the TV screen, we've assigned at runtime that we'll be looking through the wide shot camera, and we've created a plane and material to go in front of the TV to look like it's the actual screen itself, and created our input action buttons. We can now get into building the first part of our blueprint for the television screen. So in the podcast set here, I'm going to create a new folder called Blueprints, and go in there, create a new blueprint class. We'll have an actor, call it BP TV screen. And inside this, we will add a static mesh. And all we need is a plane. So let's hit compile, save, close. And now if I right click on plane 4 here, I can replace selected actors with BP TV screen, and it's swapped it out exactly. So let's just go back into the BP TV screen actually, go to the static mesh. I want to change our material to be our TV screen material. What was that called? MI TV. There we go. Great. Save and close that. And this is off to a perfect start. So let's get building our blueprint. So we can delete these other two. We just need the event begin play. And the first thing we're going to be doing here is creating a sequence of events. And we want to begin with adding a mapping context. So what this means is we are telling Unreal that the buttons we have assigned here in IMC TV buttons should be used. So we'll drag out of here, enable input. The player controller we want is get player controller. And from the player controller, we want to get the enhanced input local subsystem. Some jumbo writing, and you know you've got the right one. And so here, let's add the mapping context and drag there to the target. And then in here, we need to put the mapping context that we've created. So IMC underscore, and then we've got the TV buttons. Excellent. So to be sure that this is working, let's right click here and have the input action, which is the next button. And let's call up the input action previous button. And again, these are the names of the input actions that we created in the last step. And I just want to check that they're working. So when this is triggered, we want to print a string, and we'll call that next button. And I'm going to copy and paste. And we'll call this previous button. And let's compile and save and hit play. And now I need to click in the view screen first for this to work. Y, next button, T. All right, it's firing way too many times, so I'm going to escape here. Let's go into our IMC TV buttons, and let's look for a flaw. Triggers. We want to change this to pressed because we know pressed means fires only once. Save and close that. Come back and play again. Y, T, T, T. Excellent. So that's why it's good just to test this quickly with a couple of print strings. So we know this is working. I'm going to move this down. I like to keep myself pretty organized, so let's hit C for comment. I'll put add mapping context. And now the next thing we want to do is let Unreal know that for our static mesh, I want to be able to replace details of it at runtime. In our case, it's the texture that's being called. So we're going to build now a dynamic material instance. So it's the static mesh that we want to be updated at runtime. If you don't create a dynamic material instance, then it is by default a static material instance, which does not allow change. So let's pull out the static mesh, and from here, create dynamic material instance, and connect it into pin 1. And we need to know the source material, which is mi TV screen. And the return value, let's promote this to a variable. And I'm going to call that current page. And let's compile that. And it's going to set itself, so we don't need to do anything further here. And let's label this as create dynamic material instance. And the next bit we want to do, let me move these out of the way again. I'm going to create one more pin, and we're going to build an array, which is a set of data that contains all of the possible pages that we could have in our PDF sequence. So this is the same number of pages that your PDF is when it's fully assembled. And building it this way lets you change the length really easily when you're adapting this to other projects. So first thing, we want to make array. Okay, so we want to create our variable, and we're going to call this page array because it's our array of all the possible pages. And the variable type, we want this to be a texture and a object reference because we'll be referencing different texture objects, and change it from single to array, and compile and save for good measure. So let's pull the page array out here and hold Alt to set it. Plug that in, and from there to there, I'm just going to double click with the reroute node to keep this tidy. Bring that down to there. Looking good. Okay, great. So now what we want to do is choose the asset. So I'm going to hit Control Space to come here and select the first one, and then hit the arrow to bring it in. Great. So the first PDF page is assigned there. I'm going to add 2 more pins. Hit Control Space, select the next one, and then assign it in here. And now the third one. So at runtime now, after it has assigned the mapping context and told Unreal that the material on the static mesh should be dynamic, allowing change during runtime, we are going to build our array. So you could just keep adding pins and create 1,000 of them if you wanted. You want to do this carefully, one at a time, because one thing that can get confusing is item 0 is page 1 and item 1 is page 2. So they're offset by 1 because Unreal starts the counting from 0, not from 1. It's just the way math has developed that we consider the first position is 0. And I'm going to put in a comment here called build PDF array and compile and save. Okay, just to keep the section from getting too long, let's stop here now that we've built the initial functionality in, and we will assign the buttons completely in the next section. And we'll assign the rest of the functionality of the buttons in the next section. So now that we've laid the groundwork of our blueprint, let's go in and create the proper functions for the next and previous pages. And I'll just move that down there. So we don't need this anymore because we know it works. So when our next button is pressed, we need to know which index we're at, what position of the array we currently are at, and we want it to go to the next one. So we need to create a variable that is called current index. And we don't want it to be a Boolean. We want that to be an integer. And compile that. And the current index will start it at 0. So we always start on page 1, which is perfect. That's great. And let's drag out the current index. And we want to increase it, plus plus, increment integer. We want to increase it by 1. So this will increase by 1 and save it again. And the only thing we want to watch out for is if we have run into the end of the index numbers, if we've got up to 2. Because if we get to 2, we don't want it to go to 3 because there's nothing saved there. We want it to go to 0. So let's use the modulus, which is a very helpful math function. Modulus, perfect. Which looks at the current number and sees how many times it's divisible by the length that we want, and it returns the remainder, which is great because this will let us know if we have exceeded the number that we want. So for example, we're going to get out the page array here, and we want to know the length of the array. And we'll plug that into here. So if our array is a length of 3, there's 3 members in it, and this number is 3, then it's going to produce a result of 0, which is what our current index should be. If it was 1 and we had the length of 3, it would ignore all of the sets of 3 in here and produce the answer of 1, which is the remainder, right? So that would let it know that it's got a valid index. This is just a far more efficient method than having a series of branches. So there's a number of ways you could do this, but I like this one because it is very brief. So we want to then, again, get the page array, and we want to do a get, telling it to get this index member. So that is the texture that relates to that position in the index. So let's bring in our current page and set texture parameter value. And let's just wire that up there. And a couple reroutes just to keep it nice and tidy. And the value is this, so we're telling it to get the texture that we've assigned. That is the value of the texture that we want, but the critical thing that we need is the parameter name. So let's go back to our material, material instance TV screen, and the name of it is TV image. So let's write it exactly the same way it appears, TV underscore capital IMAGE. And then we want to set our current index to be the one we've just been working with. So we want to pull off of the modulus here into the current index. Okay, so this should work perfectly to update our PDF. Let's hit compile save to update our TV screen. So at runtime now, hit play, make sure you click in the screen, hit Y. Okay, so it's at 90 degrees, but it is otherwise working well. Previous button doesn't do anything, but the next button keeps moving it and cycles it back to 1 after 2, 3. So we know our plane here is 90 degrees off, so I'll just rotate this 90 degrees, hit play. It's coming in a bit oversized, the 16 by 9, which is surprising. I thought the TV would have been 16 by 9. And we've got a funny thing going on with the top and bottom not trimming correctly. So let's go into our TV screen, set our default texture to page 1, and look at it like that. Okay, so this looks like it's trimming correctly. Now I wonder if when we're updating the texture parameter, here let me go back into the master material. So the way I built this, I wonder if we're only updating the base color but not updating the opacity mask. And so clicking here, yeah, so that's exactly what was happening. So there's no harm in having that first page appear as a default. It's something we'd have to do anyways, because the way I constructed it, it wasn't updating at runtime with the first one. It was only updating when we press the buttons. So having the first one in as a default is a great place to start. But I'm just concerned now of why the size seems to be a bit off. So it's not a 16 by 9 TV. It must be slightly different than that, 16 by 10 or something. So that's fine, because we still want to maintain the correct aspect ratio of whatever our slides are. So I'll just come in here and shrink this down until it fits perfectly within the confines of our TV. 1.33 maybe. So this is all good. We are cropping off with the bottom of the TV lip and the upper bit, but we can't see any problems. But we can't see anything sticking out that's breaking the reality of the situation. And TVs do this all the time when you're using a display that doesn't quite fit. People are used to seeing the pillar boxes. So I think we're in good shape. So when we play, changing pages, it's all good. Great, fantastic. So what we need to do now is build the previous button. So again, let's begin with our current index. Let's get that. I'll delete our print string. And instead of a plus plus, we want to do a decrement integer. Perfect. And I'm going to have that when it's triggered. And again, we're going to put it into a modulus. And get our page array with the length. Plug that in. Actually, before you put this into the modulus, we need to add these. Otherwise, the math won't work. And then you put that into the top bit. Yeah, the top half of the modulus. So it's still checking the overall length of the array, but we're adding that length into the number that we've just decreased. So if you got your current index of 3 and you go down to 2, 2 plus 3 is 5. 5 modulus 3 gives us 2. Happy days. That's exactly what we want. If, however, our current index had been 0 and we're going now to -1, -1 plus 3 is 2. 2 modulus 3 gives us a leftover of 2. So it assigns it to 2, which again is the other end of the array. So the math works out just lovely without any branching. Now again, we want to get the page array and do a get. And we want to set the texture parameter value. And we will want to set our current index. So I'll just copy that, paste it down here. Current page going into the texture parameter value. Perfect. And our get will give us the value. So tell us which of our array elements to use. And the modulus is going to feed into the index, telling it which one to call. And again, we're going to want to save the current index. I'll just do some reroutes to keep it nice and tidy. And we need the node to be called. And so that looks good. And we will comment this out now as previous page. Compile, save, and hit play. And so Y goes up, T goes down. We get to page 1. It loops around to 3. I like to do this a couple times because you could have some residual error that ultimately drives it into trouble. But it looks like we're functioning just fine. Fantastic. So you could have many pages here, but if you're doing your podcast live, for example, and people are talking and you know when the sequence should go, you could just be standing there at the keyboard while everything's recording and press the next button to follow along with what they want. Or you could wire this up to a clicker that could be in the hand of your host and they could control it. But this is a good tidy way of building in a changing screen at runtime. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial. I hope it's been helpful to you and you have a good understanding now of how you can use input actions at runtime to change textures in your world. Please let me know if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for improvement in the future to help me make the tutorials more helpful to viewers, and have a great day.